Day in the House of Representatives, that was something different. That was something that cut right through all the noise, all the garbage that usually comes out of Washington. And let me tell you something, it gave me...
If this isn't pure chaos, nothing is. Picture Trump doom-scrolling at 3 a.m., veins bulging, phone shaking, while Stephen Colbert sharpens his monologue like a samurai blade and Robert De Niro loads verbal fireworks with a grin. What happens when late-night comedy collides with Hollywood fury? Simple, it's loud, ruthless, and completely unhinged. Stay till the end, because this meltdown isn't just entertainment, it's a masterclass in how jokes land harder than press conferences ever could. Subscribe now, before the algorithm laughs harder than Trump's Twitter feed ever did.
From people who want to do us harm. They inspect the food you put on your family's table so your kids don't get sick. They're the ones who show up when there's a natural disaster, when communities are hurting and need help. And this guy, this president, he tells them they don't have a voice anymore. He says they can't negotiate for better working conditions, can't stand up for themselves, can't even have a say in how they do their jobs. You know what that...
The moment Stephen steps into the spotlight, satire doesn't knock it, kicks the door off its hinges, and drags ego across the floor. The jokes arrive bloated with confidence, dressed like punchlines but swinging like wrecking balls. Trump's favorite ingredient, exaggeration, gets borrowed, deep-fried, and served right back with extra seasoning. Loving the video? Let's make it official. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more sharp, explosive content, because the best is still coming. Now, back to the chaos. What follows looks less like commentary and more like a public demolition, where bravado is shredded into confetti and swept away with a grin. Stephen treats Trump's statements like an overstuffed suitcase at the airport. He pops it open, lets everything spill everywhere, and calmly points out that none of it was packed with care. Hyperbole gets stretched until it snaps, then stretched again just to prove the point. It's delivered with the confidence of someone who knows the absurdity will do most of the heavy lifting. Then De Niro enters the cultural arena like a thundercloud that learned how to sneer. This isn't polite Hollywood wit. This is cinematic contempt sharpened into a weapon. His presence alone feels like an accusation.
He signed this executive order, took away collective bargaining rights from federal workers. Just like that, boom, done. Now let me tell you who these federal workers are, because this isn't about some faceless bureaucrats sitting in fancy offices. These are good people, hardworking people who serve this country every single day. They process your veterans' benefits, so our heroes get what they earn.
The delivery carries the weight of decades of characters who never tolerated nonsense, now condensed into a glare strong enough to curdle hairspray. Trump's grandstanding shrinks under that stare, suddenly resembling a loud audition nobody requested. Stephen keeps poking, prodding, inflating the spectacle until it becomes impossible not to laugh at its sheer scale. Trump's self-mythology gets treated like a theme park ride that promises thrills and delivers nothing but dizziness. De Niro, meanwhile, plays the unimpressed adult in a room full of noise machines. His sarcasm moves slowly, deliberately, savoring every second. Each remark lands like a precisely aimed eyebrows with intent, lowered with judgment. Trump's bluster collides with that calm disdain, and suddenly echoes like sound in an empty warehouse. Loud, repetitive, and strangely lonely. The brilliance lies in how relentlessly the roasters stay on target. De Niro circles Trump's favorite habits like a shark carrying a punchline, ever rushing, always smiling. Every boast turns into a balloon. Every exaggeration meets a pin pop, then another pop. The audience watches the performance deflate in real time, replaced by laughter tinged with disbelief that this much material keeps replenishing itself. De Niro adds texture to the take, layering sarcasm over frustration like a perfectly aged insult. Trump's obsession with winning gets twisted until it resembles a participation trophy factory running at full capacity. Everything is the biggest, the best, the loudest, until Stephen calmly rearranges the scale and reveals how small it all sounds when measured against reality. The laughter isn't accidental. It's engineered, built on timing that slices through bluster like a hot knife through buttered ego. De Niro's disdain lands differently. It doesn't dance, it stares. The kind of stare that suggests patience is gone and sarcasm is the last polite option. Trump's theatrics bounce off that energy and collapse flat, like a drum solo played in an empty room. Net.
It's not going to change with him. Everything. He's just, the point is we have to keep fighting and pushing until he is out. Period. There's no other way. He's not going to want to leave the White House. What is he facing? He's facing certain things no matter what the Supreme Court. They're going to fight.
The contrast is brutal. One side bloated with self-importance, the other deflating it with practiced contempt as the jokes stack up. Trump's reactions feel like a looping soundtrack locked at maximum volume. The louder the noise gets, the funnier the silence from the roasters becomes. Stephen leans into that silence, using it as punctuation. He lets it hang heavy, awkward until the point lands without needing emphasis. The mockery cuts deeper because it never begs for attention. It assumes control. Together, they turn bravado into slapstick, ego into props, and outrage into background static. Trump's carefully curated image starts to resemble a funhouse, warped, distorted by humor that knows exactly where to press. Stephen highlights the contradictions with a smile that suggests gratitude for the endless supply. De Niro reinforces them with a seriousness that somehow makes every joke hit harder. The laughter builds not from cruelty, but from exposure. Everything is visible. Nothing escapes inspection. It feels less like a roast and more like a slow unraveling. Each segment peels back another layer of exaggeration until what remains is a caricature struggling to hold its shape. Stephen keeps the tempo lively. Juggling sarcasm and facts like toys, De Niro anchors the chaos, reminding everyone that mockery gains power when delivered with restraint. By the time the dust settles, Trump's thunder has been reduced to background noise. Stephen's satire hums unsatisfied, but not finished. De Niro's disdain lingers like a closing note that refuses to fade. Stephen keeps pressing Trump's favorite pressure points, like a pianist who discovered which keys scream when struck just right. Every exaggerated claim gets inflated past reason until it floats helplessly above the stage wobbling. Obvious, begging for gravity to intervene. Stephen doesn't swat them down in anger. He smiles and lets logic drift through like a casual breeze. One by one, the balloons burst not with spectacle, but with the soft, humiliating pop of inevitability.
For what he's done, all the awful, monstrous things that he's done. You know, I don't see any, he's not going to want to leave. Why should he?
On that point, then, what do you make of the National Guard deployments? He first did it in Los Angeles, then really did it in Washington, D.C., where he has control of the National Guard. But then he's trying to get them into Illinois, into Portland.
Yeah, he's going to get them in to intimidate when the midterms come. It's just this psychologically is going to wear on people. We have to have a defense against
Trump's obsession with dominance becomes a running gag stretched to absurd proportions. Everything has to be towering, unrivaled, legendary even when it looks like a cardboard cutout taped together backstage. Stephen turns that fixation into slapstick, reframing bravado as a never-ending sales pitch delivered to a room that stopped listening hours ago. The louder the performance grows, the smaller it feels. Collapsing under the weight of its own repetition, Trump's bombastic energy crashes into Stephen's calm like a wave hitting a cliff, then slides back into the ocean foamy and unimpressive. Stephen keeps the satire moving, threading jokes together like beads on a necklace made entirely of excess. Trump's public persona becomes a character study in overacting, a performance so committed it forgets subtlety ever existed. Stephen exaggerates the exaggeration, creating a mirror so warped it finally reflects the truth. The audience needs no guidance. The absurdity announces itself. De Niro's contribution feels like a raised eyebrow stretched across an entire segment. The look alone suggests the verdict has already been reached. Trump's declarations, once meant to sound commanding, now resemble a looped soundtrack from a malfunctioning theme park ride, loud, repetitive, and increasingly ignored. De Niro lets that realization hang in the air. Heavy and merciless. Stephen lines the moments up, not to explain them, but to admire the chaos. The humor thrives in the gaps where logic should live, but clearly moved out without leaving a forwarding address. Trump's fixation on appearing unbeatable becomes a comedy goldmine. Stephen frames it as a self-written legend, constantly revised mid. The myth keeps expanding, swallowing its own footnotes until it collapses into something resembling performance. Art. De Niro watches it all unfold with the patience of someone who's seen enough sequels to know exactly when a franchise has run out of ideas.
an oppositional offense. We have to be strong to counter that kind of situation when it comes, because you know that's what he's trying. It's better to neutralize it now than to worry about it later, or try and neutralize a bit of it and be ready, because this is what it is. It's going to be the freedom to walk into the polling station and vote without being intimidated. It's all about intimidation.
Are you certain, though, that people are going to be able to do that? I mean,
we want to make sure that they will go, that they feel comfortable enough.
The laughter deepens because the roast never punches. Down it punches through. Stephen doesn't invent flaws. He rearranges the existing ones into a sharper picture. The jokes cut because they're precise, slicing away layers of self-praise to expose the frantic need underneath. De Niro reinforces that exposure by refusing to embellish. Stephen spins it into a parody of competition without competitors a marathon run entirely in place. Victory is declared again and again, loudly, urgently, while nothing actually moves forward. The joke lands not because it's exaggerated, but because it barely is. De Niro's presence adds weight to that realization. He becomes the audience member who stopped clapping and started squinting. His sarcasm isn't playful. It's disappointed, and that disappointment somehow stings more. Trump's chest-thumping bravado looks especially fragile beside that energy. Like a drum solo interrupted by a power outage, Stephen escalates the absurdity with surgical confidence. Trump's self-assuredness turns into a prop picked up, examined, then gently dropped to reveal how hollow it sounds. The rhythm never breaks. Each transition flows into the next like a river of irony, carving deeper grooves with every turn. De Niro adds punctuation through silence and stillness, letting the jokes echo just long enough to settle. The contrast is merciless. Trump's relationship with reality becomes an unspoken punchline. Hovering over the entire performance, Stephen treats reality like a suggestion rather than a requirement. Spotlighting the creative liberties taken with facts, the humor doesn't accuse, it displays. De Niro's reaction suggests disbelief has given way to weary acceptance, and somehow that makes the satire hit even harder.
In my country, we're fighting like hell for the democracy we once took for granted. And that affects all of us. That affects all of us here because the arts are democratic. Art is inclusive. It brings people together. Like tonight, art looks for truth. Art embraces diversity. And that's why art is a threat. That's why we are a threat to autocrats and...
Every attempt at authority gets reframed as theater. Every declaration becomes a rehearsal for applause that never quite arrives. Stephen keeps the tempo lively, bouncing between sarcasm and exaggeration with gymnastic precision. De Niro grounds the chaos, reminding everyone that mockery gains strength when it refuses to hurry. Trump's image, once carefully curated, now looks like a collage built from leftover slogans and unchecked confidence. Stephen rearranges the pieces with obvious delight, forming shapes that look ridiculous precisely because they always were. De Niro watches with the expression of someone who knows the joke doesn't need assistance. The cumulative effect is devastating. De Niro's restraint keeps the tone anchored, stopping the spectacle from tipping into noise. As the satire deepens, Trump's predictable reactions fold into the punchline. The louder the outrage simmers in the background, the calmer the roasters become. Stephen leans into that contrast, letting silence do the heavy lifting when words would be excessive. De Niro lets a pause stretch just long enough to feel uncomfortable, then moves on without ceremony. The roast feels less like an attack and more like exposure therapy for an overinflated ego. Stephen and De Niro don't chase relevance. They wait for it to wander into the spotlight and trip. Trump's performance obliges again and again. The laughter turns knowing, almost cathartic, as patterns repeat and exaggerations collapse under their own weight. By this point, the spectacle becomes almost poetic. Bombast meets brevity. De Niro anchors the moment with a gravity that refuses to be impressed. Trump's mythos unravels thread by thread not through shouting or outrage, but through relentless clarity that reveals how much of it was smoke stitched together with volume. Stephen keeps sanding down the legend until the shine wears off and the cracks become impossible to ignore.
The esteemed president has had himself appointed head of one of our premier cultural institutions. He has cut funding and support to the arts, humanities, and education. And now he has announced a 100% tariff on films produced outside the U.S. Let that sink in for a minute. You can't put a price on creativity, but apparently you can put a tariff on it.
Each pass of wit sharpens the focus, turning exaggeration into evidence of excess rather than strength. What once sounded commanding now echoes like rehearsal lines spoken long after the audience has gone home. De Niro's disdain remains steady-heavy, immovable, and uninterested in decoration. It's the kind that doesn't need flourish to sting. His restraint works like gravity, dragging inflated bravado back to earth without effort. While Steven moves through satire with precise agility, De Niro holds his ground, letting silence and presence do the damage. The material seems to regenerate on its own, as if exaggeration were a renewable resource. Satire keeps pace easily, and the gap between performance and reality widens with every beat. Steven stays poised, amused, and ready for the next opening. De Niro remains grounded, unimpressed, and devastatingly controlled. The stage stays open, the spotlight warm, and the absurdity shows no sign of packing up or quieting down anytime soon.